Mark Rogers TV talking Big Ten. We bring in Taylor Rooks of the Big Ten Network to talk on the field Big Ten play because regardless of what's happening in the conference, on the sidelines with decisions and ADs and head coaches, we can't ignore this matchup, Taylor, when we've got Michigan State and Nebraska. This is really the marquee game to date. We'll see what happens with Ohio State on down the road, taking on the Spartans a little bit later. But right now, this is an exciting game that finally has this fan base as a blueprint in the Midwest as Big Ten supporters energized. So you got to be excited about this one.
Yeah, oh, for sure. And I think I'm not alone when I say it's going to be amazing to see how Abdullah can handle the Michigan State defense. He is just, you watch him play, and it's like, how does he get past, the entire defense of some schools? So, and with Michigan State being such a powerhouse on the defensive side, it's just going to be a great matchup. It's like battle of the ages for the Big Ten this weekend.
Yeah, you would think Michigan State would just load up the box, stop Abdullah, make Tommy Armstrong try to beat them on the outside on one-on-one coverage because they've been so good in covering man-to-man. So that's going to be an exciting game. Your thoughts about who would be the better team for the Big Ten to have win this game and make a push toward the college football playoffs? Because there's a bit of a debate considering Nebraska hasn't lost a game, but Michigan State given a little bit more credit on the national level for the Oregon game and also just based on the credibility of winning the Rose Bowl last year and being considered the better team.
Yeah, and see, I am a big believer in the whole mantra of defense wins championships. So I would go with Michigan State probably 9 times out of 10 for this. Not to downplay the talent that is on Nebraska, but just the way Michigan State matches up to schools on a national scale. I mean, I feel like going and, last year people thought that Ohio State was going to beat them because they had Braxton, they had all this stuff, but Shalik Calhoun and the Spartans came in and it was just, it was done for Ohio State. So I think I would put my faith in Michigan State for the Big Ten and in the playoffs. So hopefully I would just be happy with the Big Ten having a team in the playoffs. But if I have to pick one, I say Michigan State.
And Taylor, guessing your background, I'm thinking that you have that same defensive mindset analyzing basketball play, too, in regards to but that's a discussion for another time. Maryland, Ohio State, and I was one of those people, I have to tell you, Taylor, that thought Rutgers, Maryland, not going to add anything to the Big Ten. I know that there were other considerations about fan base in New York City and along the Beltway and subscribers and name brand and education. They're 2 fine universities. All those things are great. I was just looking at the football perspective and saying, the SEC and the Big Ten used to be like this, and now the SEC's breaking free records, and they've broken free from everybody else. And to try to catch up, those aren't the 2 schools that are going to do it. But Maryland and Rutgers have shown us something that they may add something to the Big Ten.
Oh, for sure. And I think, you were not alone in that thought. I think a lot of people were like, okay, Maryland and Rutgers do not belong in the Big Ten, but I think that they are really proving themselves in the conference. I mean, you have a really good quarterback in Gary Nova. I mean, he can run, he can throw. He just kind of has that dual threat. It was so sad when Paul James got hurt because, I mean, he was a monster running back, and I thought he could have really put up some big numbers for the Big Ten Conference. So, of course, wishing him a really speedy recovery. And then Stephon Diggs and Deion Long had breakout games this past weekend for Maryland, and I think that they have really good skilled positions over there. I think Diggs has the potential to be a really big receiver in the Big Ten, so I think they're making their way in there. I think they had a really good welcome to the Big Ten. It was a good debut.
Yeah, and a couple of weeks ago we saw where Penn State goes to Piscataway to take on Rutgers, and we see that place energized unlike it typically is. Because of the name brand of Penn State coming in there, and that could turn out to be a nice little rivalry. And we may see the same thing with Maryland, Ohio State, and so I think the Big Ten got it right, lining up a big boy to take on Maryland and go there for the first Big Ten game for Maryland.
Yeah, and one thing I will say about Rutgers, they seem to have a really good fan base. I mean, Rutgers fans tweet me about the game like every single day. You just feel like they're all tuned in to watch their team. So I really do think they were great additions. And I know some people are saying they still need to prove themselves as they go forward in the conference, but I in no way think they are, quote unquote, as bad as people believe they were going to be.
So, Taylor, your thoughts about the conference, because I'll give you my quick take. I think Gonna put you to sleep. Sorry. It is my show, so I'll take 20 seconds here. Yeah. I just think from a national perception, which I think is far removed sometimes from the reality in the field, I think Ohio State did the Big Ten a lot of good, but a lot of damage in losing 2 national championship games. Because a couple of those seasons, the Big Ten was playing extremely well in bowl games across the board, but Ohio State holding the banner and everybody looking at what happens in the national championship game. And ever since, the Big Ten's taken a knock, regardless of having a couple seasons in which, an Ohio State would win the Rose Bowl and Iowa would win the Orange Bowl, something like that. And it just didn't seem to change national perception. Now, going into what happened a couple weekends ago, Ohio State, Michigan, and Michigan State, the big name programs, now we see that Michigan's not nearly as good as we thought they might be. They all lose on the big stage, and even though the Big Ten's won some smaller profile games since then, it just seems to be damaged to the point that it really can't make up for it this season, and we'll see what happens down the road.
Yeah, and trust me, I am not a big believer in, good losses or, almost won or even moral victories. I don't believe in any of that. But you look at even the Wisconsin-LSU game, and you're like, okay, Wisconsin could have beat them. And I just think that as people are so much, lovers of the SEC and lovers of the ACC, they're like, well, Wisconsin lost, so it doesn't matter. But the way that people perceive the Big Ten wouldn't have seen them even almost beating LSU. And I think that's important, not to say that, they didn't win, but just like it was better than you thought it was going to be. I feel like people have such a negative kind of connotation with the Big Ten that I don't think necessarily should be there. I think that, of course, winning those games against the big conferences obviously helps the Big Ten conference, but I don't think that the kind of the negativity around the conference should be there. I think Michigan State is a great team. I think people were freaking out when Braxton Miller got hurt, but it looks like J.T. Barrett is really holding his own for the Buckeyes. I know you said you're a big Buckeye fan, so that should be good for you. And then even Wisconsin. And we actually were talking about this on the show once. It's like one of the things that's really weird about the Big Ten Conference is like who is the kind of franchise player for the conference? It was Braxton. But who is that person you think Big Ten and you're like, this is our guy? Like who, I don't really know like who you'd say that, but you have that for all the other conferences. And I think that once there's this emerging player, maybe it's Abdullah now, but this is kind of the first year of that. But, maybe I think as it progresses, the Big Ten will gain more traction because I'm a little biased, but I think it's a great conference. So I hope it gets better.
And I think you make a really good point because, when you're in competition, all that matters is the win versus the loss. I get that mentality, but at the same time, if we're evaluating a conference, you have to look at the competition of the game. It would be totally different evaluating Wisconsin if they would have lost 45-0 to LSU versus a game that was back and forth in 28-24. And sure, the Big Ten lost 2 out of 3 against the SEC in bowl play last year, but they did win 1 of the 3 games. Nebraska beat Georgia, and the other games were very competitive. So, Wisconsin took South Carolina, a team that finished in the top 5 down to the last few minutes of that game, and Iowa played within a touchdown of LSU. So they were competitive games. They didn't lose by 4 or 5 touchdowns. So I think the groupthink kind of sets in, and there's a stigma placed on a particular team or conference, and then everybody just jumps on board, and that's how things work in the media. So
and I think sometimes people tend to look at the worst team and say this is indicative of the Big Ten. Like people will look at Purdue and say, well, Purdue's in the Big Ten, or look at like a team like that and say your Big Ten team's bad. But every conference has that team that isn't the star. You know what I mean? So I just think it's kind of like a thing that will get better in time.
Well, Taylor, thanks for joining us. Anything in particular that we could be looking out for that you're working on?
Yeah, well, you can watch BTN Live. I will be on again tomorrow at 6 Eastern Time. I'm going to do some pre- and post-game reporting for the Indiana-Iowa game next weekend, and then you can always catch me at night doing the Big Ten Network updates. I'll be on tonight at the top of the hour starting at 7. So.
Great. Good stuff, Taylor. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate the insight.
Yeah, thank you. It was my pleasure. Happy to be here.